everyone. It's Emily Austin. I'm joined here today with Stephen Miller.
Great to be with you today. So thank you so much for having me.
Why did you start America First Legal?
So I launched America First Legal in the spring of 2021, and I started thinking about it and really putting all my energy into launching it right after I left the White House in January of 21. And I realized that what was missing from the conservative legal movement and really just from the country overall was a legal organization dedicated to fighting for all the things that normal people believe in. Because you have all of these really radicalized far-left legal organizations that we're familiar with, the most famous of which is the ACLU, and they're always fighting on the side of open borders or on the side of communists or Marxists or Hamas radicals, whatever it may be. And normal people don't have a voice. Regular people, people who believe in borders, in security, in a government that is responsible, ethical, transparent, who believe in police and who believe in law enforcement and who believe in the idea that corporations should serve the interests of their shareholders and not radical agendas like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So across the board, there was a need for a nonprofit foundation. So everything we do for our clients is free to them or pro bono. There was a need for a nonprofit foundation, that it was a place that parents, students, shareholders, government workers, small business owners could come to seek justice, to seek a redress of their grievances, to be able to go to court and have their voice heard and their claim vindicated. And again, they don't have to pay for it. That's made possible by the charitable contributions that we receive. And so that's what we set out to do, and that's what we've done these last 3 years now.
Do you feel like the next generation, Gen Z, we call it, play a huge factor in all of the reasons you listed as to why we need the AFL?
Well, I mean, Gen Z has endured a really unfortunate environment that you wouldn't wish, I think, on most children, right? Gen Z has come of age in a time of dwindling economic opportunity. You know, a lot of people in Gen Z, I think, are very worried they're not going to have the same standard of living as their parents or their grandparents, right? For the first time in American history, people look at their parents and grandparents and they think, I don't think I can attain that standard of living. They're entering a corporate environment that is very soulless and very, it's all about constant HR correction and HR mandates. And if you step out of line even one little bit, you'll be completely ruined. Versus understanding that humans are humans, they make mistakes, and what matters is that they have good intentions. They experience an educational environment from when they were, frankly, in preschool through college, in which teachers are crazy, like they're actual like Marxists, right? Like the communist teachers. And you see that in our college campuses today.
Yeah.
I mean, children spent 18 years of their lives, from like I said, from preschool to college, having to be in a classroom or in a university environment with people who are legitimately insane. And so it is a difficult age to grow up in, to be part of Generation Z. Even in my generation, which we still had a lot of crazy things going on. I'm sort of, I think, at the tail end of the millennials, you would say.
Yeah.
Even in my generation, we had a somewhat normal childhood growing up. And you think about the influences that children have had to deal with who are coming of age today, and of course what they're going through right now, it really is just heartbreaking. And so I like to think that a great example of this, which we didn't even get into, of course, is the trans issue. And so when I was in school, if you had said to anybody, what would be a great idea is if you put a man in a skirt and you have him run like a girl's track meet. Like even like the liberals would have looked at you like you were like had something wrong in your head. Like they would think that you were crazy.
I want to know in your mind how did we get to where we are now?
Because nobody was pushing back on the crazy people for a long time. So I think the mistake that this is, I think, a curse of all civilizations. And I think one of the mistakes that people make in understanding how politics works and how society works, and it's true of the law too. People think that if you have a majority position or opinion, that will be the way that things are and that society will run. Like society will accommodate how most people feel. Mm-hmm. So you feel pretty secure and safe because you think, well, most people agree with me about all the issues that we discussed. Most people agree with me that, racism is bad, that we should have a race-neutral society. Most people agree with me that open borders is bad. We should have a completely secure border. Most people agree with me that there shouldn't be biological men running in girls' sporting events or in their locker rooms. But the way the society works in practice in a democratic society is that a highly agitated, radical group of people can bend society to their will.
Yeah.
They can enter into a bureaucracy and through sheer motivation and force of will can push government action in their direction. They can enter a university system and the soft, gentle, like old school liberal types will just get bulldozed, get run over, right? And the radicals will take control. And they do the same thing in corporations. You know, how did it go? When I was growing up, again, it's not about my childhood per se. I think it's a universal experience. You know, Disney was a safe brand.
Yeah.
It was a safe brand. Like you could, maybe some of the stuff got, like a little bit PC as I started to get older, but like basically it was, like Beauty and the Beast and like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Cinderella and, like the basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
Although actually Cinderella's like 100 years old, but we still watched it when I was a kid. And the point is that how did it become that now you have a major American corporation pushing really destructive, extreme agendas onto little children?
Yeah.
And it's not because they took a vote at Disney and they said, 51% of people who work here want to do this to all of America's kids, right? It's that you have a lot of people who are focused on living their own lives or doing their jobs. Then you have a small core of people who say, I'm going to bend this corporation to my will. I'm going to work in HR. I'm going to work in marketing. I'm going to work my way up the ranks. I'm going to step on all the little people in my way, and I'm going to do it my way. And everyone is going to be afraid of me. And to the key part, to bring this all home, and then outside groups will then threaten to sue if you don't do things the way we want to. If you don't have the right race quotas, the right gender quotas, or whatever it may be, we're going to sue you. And so that's the last piece of it, is the threat of litigation from the radical left. And so all of it sort of comes home by saying, I realized that we had to have a litigation group that's going to sue on behalf of normal, on behalf of things that are right, on behalf of things that are pure and just and righteous, so that we can change the whole incentive structure for corporations and government so that they're afraid of regular Americans, not just afraid of crazy Americans, because that's ultimately what decides what direction society is going to go.
Well, it seems like DEI has been this hot craze that's taking over the world, and I'm not even too sure the same way a lot of these Hamas radicalists on campuses don't really know anything about the Palestinian conflict. A lot of people don't even know what DEI is. So first, can you give us your sense of a valid explanation as to what is DEI and why it's so harmful? Because I know the AFL has done a bunch of work trying to counter all of the effects of DEI that's been poisoning our society.
It's a really important question, because you're right. A lot of times people throw around acronyms, and they're saying the right thing, and their heart's in the right place. But for maybe people who are less familiar with it, they're not able to necessarily explain what it means. And so it's important when we talk about these things to be communicating to an audience that may be less familiar with what DEI actually is and why it's so threatening.
Yeah.
So DEI, of course, stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are just buzzwords. They could have picked any buzzwords they wanted to. Those are the ones they went with. But what it means specifically is it's a completely racialist way of looking at the world. It says that everybody is defined by their skin color, and that anytime any individual who's part of a oppressed group doesn't have the exact same outcome as any other group, that must be evidence that the oppressor group has discriminated against them, and that the solution to that is to hurt the oppressor group. So let's put this in the context of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, right, that we see playing out on college campuses. So the idea here, using this DEI lens, is that Israel is doing well. They have a good economy. They have a good tech sector. People seem to be happy there. Jews are an oppressor group. That means they stole everything from the Palestinians, right? And
Apparently.
Right, and have to be punished. So if I'm, a good guy, right, on a college campus, and this is, by the way, this is for the useful idiots. There's obviously a lot of people involved too, in the pro-Hamas protests who are genuinely subscribe to Hamas ideology, right? But there's a layer of useful idiots, right? And and so their view is that, well, the Palestinians, their country, or it's not really a country, but this is how they would look at it, right? The Palestinian Authority is poor and less well off, so they must be the righteous group. and we have to support everything that they say. And it takes to such an extreme of justifying terrorism,
Right.
in its most barbaric and monstrous forms. And so it shows you that DEI is a mental poison because it prevents you from being able to objectively evaluate any situation and to be able to understand that sometimes there's different outcomes for reasons that, in fact, oftentimes, that have nothing to do with anything that the successful group did wrong. And that way of looking at the world, it leads you to be filled with hate and vitriol and malice. And again, another example of this that we're very familiar with is in the context of so-called affirmative action and university admissions, where you were literally punishing students who were white, Asian, Jewish, Indian, because they got a higher test score or because they took more AP classes, right? Or they just had a higher GPA or whatever it is. So we're going to punish them because those must be stolen opportunities. They must have taken them from somebody else. And so it's a way of looking at the world that fundamentally comes from a place of hate because it requires you to look at everything in the world and say, any group that is doing better are oppressors and we must hurt and punish and steal from them. And that just turns every group against every other group, and it completely balkanizes and breaks down society.
Right. It comes down to the narrative that it's us versus them, oppressed versus oppressor, and there's never actually any stances on, well, how do we bridge that gap? They actually like to heighten it. One thing that I saw that really stuck out to me that the AFL did was they sued the Biden administration to enforce the Taylor Force Act, which terminated funding to, speaking of borderline terrorist groups, the UNRWA. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so this is a very important lawsuit that we filed. The Biden administration violated a law known as the Taylor Force Act that prevents funding any group in the Palestinian Authority that would subsidize terrorism. So pretty straightforward. You can't subsidize terrorism. You have to confirm, you have to do a review to demonstrate and prove that none of these funds are going to be used to subsidize terrorism. The Biden administration violated that law and did, in fact, directly subsidize Palestinian terrorism. And so we're suing them for that breach. And one of our plaintiffs is a congressman from Texas named Ronnie Jackson, who I had the privilege of serving with in the White House, where he was the chief of the medical unit and also an admiral in the Navy. An important point about this is that it just underscores more broadly how the Biden administration thinks it can get away with breaking literally any law at any time at all. Right? It is a completely lawless administration. The law says you have to pay back your student loans. They break that law. The law says you can't fund Palestinian terrorism. They break that law. The law says you have to deport illegal immigrants. They break that law. The law says that you have to protect women and girls in the academic setting. They issue regulations saying no, all those rights extend to, or say all those rights extend to trans men, or trans women who are really men. And so they just do whatever they want to do, no matter what the law says. You need a group like ours to actually take them to court and hold them accountable.
Well, speaking of accountability, you guys have taken a large stance in fighting for free and fair elections. I mean, we're months away from November. What has the AFL been doing to reinforce that?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. So we actually just filed a complaint in Pennsylvania where the Secretary of State has a policy where they're not checking Social Security numbers or driver's licenses for voter registration, which is a massive open invitation, of course, to fraud and non-citizen voting. I mean, it's still very easy, of course, for illegal aliens to get driver's licenses or steal Social Security numbers. But it is a minimum benchmark to ask somebody to have a Social Security number or a driver's license, and they're not even doing that. And so that's a very important complaint we filed. And we also have a lawsuit in Arizona against Maricopa County, which has been the center of so much fraud and illegality. And our complaint there alleges a systemic and far-reaching violation of state election law in order to facilitate the counting of illegitimate ballots.
I think obviously we know why they kind of want that lawless voting in a way. I'm not going to get into that. But you've been vocal even before you've begun with the AFL to combat the illegal immigration crisis. You started this in the Trump administration, and now you've brought that to the AFL. What work have they been doing to combat this?
This has been one of our biggest issues, fighting against illegal immigration, which again is another example. People don't really realize this, and then you explain it to them, and they do. The left's embrace of open borders is another extension of this DEI ideology, because the way they look at it is American citizens, in this case, as a group, are the oppressor, and the poor illegal alien who crosses the border is the oppressed. So we have to give them free education, free housing, free medical care. Certainly can't deport them. We have to give them every benefit under the sun, and you, the taxpayer, have to pay for it. So
even ones Americans don't get.
Yes, many ones Americans don't get.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Americans, in order to get health care, they oftentimes have to work at long, grueling jobs, and to support their families, get their health care benefits, and then they're having to pay for the free health care for illegal aliens. So we at America First Legal, we filed a number of lawsuits against the Biden administration, many of them as counsel for the state of Texas. And the most important one that I would say is currently in the courts concerns this Biden program that many people I think have now heard of, where they fly illegal aliens from their home countries directly to the United States. So they don't go to the border and get released. They take an airplane from, say, Haiti, and they fly it directly to Florida. And so they don't stop at the southern border on the way. Yeah, so they've resettled.
Do they fly first?
I think it's probably coach, but it's still
unacceptable.
Yes, still not inexpensive. But but who knows, honestly. But but they've flown over or almost 500,000 illegal immigrants this way into the country. It's on a program known as parole. Parole is a term which I think many people are familiar with in the criminal justice context. In the immigration setting, parole is supposed to be a benefit that you give in a very extreme humanitarian situation. So, for example, imagine if somebody showed up at the border and they would die if they didn't get some kind of emergency medical care. They could be granted parole. Or if, say, an Iranian scientist who was going to spill secrets on the nuclear program showed up at the border. So they've taken this extremely limited provision in the law, and they've granted it categorically to hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants to just fly them directly into the country. So that's one of our bigger and more important lawsuits we have right now.
I've been hearing chirping, I don't know how factual this is, but a scary thought that Biden is willing to, and I hope it's not through parole, allow the citizens of Gaza into the country. Do you think that this is something that's far-fetched or possible? This is all speculation.
Oh, no. Unfortunately, the Biden administration doesn't even need to use the parole program to bring them in. They have a simpler way of doing it, which is through the State Department-run refugee program. So the way that refugee admissions work is typically the UN designates somebody as having refugee status, and then the State Department then resettles them, brings them to the United States, and then they're given a path to citizenship and more or less unlimited welfare. So when you come into the country as a refugee, it really is like winning the golden lottery ticket. I mean, you get everything. You get Medicaid, you get food stamps, you get public housing, and within 5 years from the date of your arrival, you can be a voting U.S. citizen. So this is a really alarming and concerning thing that the Biden administration is indeed planning to bring Gazans to the United States in very large numbers. I suspect that they would ramp up this program in earnest after the election. And so I think it is a very safe thing to say that if Biden's still in office, that he would bring vast numbers of Gazans to the United States. And I've said this before, the objective here being to turn the Midwest into the Middle East. And that's exactly what they want to do and what would happen.
I mean, we see it all the time. You recently sued the Department of Education for obstructing evidence of the Biden administration protecting these foreign Hamas-loving extremists on campuses. Can you give us more details as to your lawsuit?
Yeah, so the Department of Education is refusing to turn over records about these campus demonstrations and so we sued them, where we believe that large numbers of foreign nationals are participating and involved in these pro-Hamas demonstrations. And so again, this is the Biden administration, through its immigration policy, bringing and keeping people who hate America, who hate the West, who hate Jews, hate Christians, hate a lot of people, right, to the United States. And so, I mean, again, it inflicts such unimaginable harm to our democracy to bring people to our country who hate everything about our country and the people who live here. And that's what this administration is doing and continues to do. And so, again, for people who may be less engaged in these issues, this is going to come to you whether you like it or not. In other words, look at Europe. Look what happened with mass Muslim migration in Europe. This is going to come to you whether you like it or not. If these policies remain in effect, you're going to see a lot of the same things in terms of radicalization, in terms of violence, in terms of jihadism, in terms of sectarianism. You know, a lot of the conflicts that right now we in America associate with being in Afghanistan or being in Iraq or being in Yemen or being in Libya or being in the Gaza Strip. By immigration policy, you can bring all of those conflicts right to your hometown.
So why do you feel like people are so unbothered and unalarmed by the future radicalization of the United States, it seems?
When people find out about it, they are deeply alarmed. It's simply the fact that, I mean, so if you ever poll these issues, I mean, there's overwhelming opposition to bringing in refugees from jihadist areas. This has been a consistent and unbroken polling finding. But the media, the corporate press as a general matter, does not talk about or discuss this issue. I mean, there's a lot of issues that the corporate media will not discuss. Or if they do discuss, will do so in a way that is the exact opposite of the truth. But of all those issues, the one in which they are most committed to hiding the truth is and always has been immigration. And this has been true across the West. And again, we've seen this play out in London. We've seen it play out in Brussels. We've seen it play out across Italy. And this is the case, too, in America, where they don't want to have a national conversation about whether we should bring people to this country who hate this country. And so, it's when you have massive numbers of unvetted migrants from dangerous parts of the world, no matter how hard you try to integrate or assimilate, when you bring in such vast numbers of people from places that have such fundamentally different attitudes, you're going to end up, again, with the same kinds of balkanization that we've seen in the United Kingdom. And so when you have unlimited numbers of people coming in, be it through the refugee program, the student visa program, or any other program, you're going to lead to not only significant national security concerns, but really significant impacts on the quality of life of the people living in this country.
Now, would you bridge that into the broad title of DEI? So we'll unfortunately find out the hard way what happens if we don't crack down on radicalization. But in terms of DEI, if the AFL, let's say, didn't exist, which thank God they do, to do the work that they're doing to combat that, how can we predict the next 10, 20 years of American society will end up with DEI being so popular nowadays?
So I think that at its most basic level, it's about being pro-civilization or anti-civilization. What we have here in this country and sort of across civilization more broadly is very special and unique in terms of what we inherited, although it's disappearing before our eyes, in terms of an impartial justice system, in terms of constitutional governance, in terms of a tolerant society where people can have different views and they can disagree without turning to violence, which is not the case, as we know, in some Middle Eastern countries.
Right.
In terms of having a society where there is economic opportunity, there's public safety, and there are unifying Judeo-Christian principles. All of these things require constant devotion to maintain. And if you have one group of people that are trying to demolish it constantly all the time, and you have another group of people who are just sort of watching from the sidelines, they're going to lose everything. That's what's going to happen. You're just going to lose everything. The greatest empires in all of history eventually, all at one point in time, unraveled, and primarily through the complacency of the people who were living there. Like, fundamentally, they grew tired of maintaining their own countries or civilizations, and that's what this comes down to. And that, again, that's the struggle that you see playing out right now. Again, on our college campuses, there are more normal people than crazy pro-Hamas people on those college campuses by a wide margin. But the question is, do normal people in normal families who love this country, who love America, who believe in our way of life, are they going to put as much energy into saving it as other people are putting into destroying it?
That's ultimately what it comes down to. How do you feel, whether it's you and I or the AFL, how do we get this silent majority, I'll call them complacent folks, to take action before it is too late?
Well, all we can do is what we're doing right now, and many more things like this. You have to do everything in your power to communicate what's going on in this country to a broader audience. And then you have to communicate to people that there are tools and resources available to them to fight back, which, again, to bring this full circle, is, used to be they would say, well, if something terrible is happening, you should write a letter to the editor, right? Like, which, yes, you should do that. To be clear, that's a great thing to do, assuming anyone still reads newspapers. But we can do so much more than that, right? We can sue the bad guys. We can actually take them to court. So you as a concerned fill in the blank, student, parent, administrator, government worker who wants to be a whistleblower, you as a citizen have the power to actually seek real justice in a court of law. So you don't have to just complain silently. You don't have to just take it. You don't have to just, if you're a corporate worker and you're subjected to illegal discrimination, you don't have to just bear it. You can come to us and we can help you. And so fundamentally, the most important thing is to let people know that there is a way to fight back. And there's a lot more than just filing lawsuits. I'm not saying that we can save all of civilization only through filing lawsuits, but it is absolutely an indispensable part of saving America. The left succeeded in changing so much of our country through its litigious activism. It's going to take equal and more righteous litigation to get this country back on the right track. So I understand that you just graduated college yourself. We're talking so much about Gen Z.
Yeah.
And I forgot that you are Gen Z yourself. And so my message to all of the young people out there in high school, in college, just graduated, who are dealing with all of these struggles and difficulties and the unfairness that we talked about today, who've had to grow up and come of age in this environment, that you are not alone, that you have resources. You do not have to suffer injustice or indignity silently. If you have been the victim of illegal conduct, you have the right to seek justice in a court of law. If you are a victim of unlawful behavior or activity, of discriminatory behavior, prejudicial behavior or activity, you have the right to seek legal aid and justice. And that's why organizations like mine exist. That's why America First Legal exists. So reach out to us. Go to our website, aflegal.org. Email us, info@aflegal.org, and we can get in touch with you, figure out what's going on, and see if legal action is appropriate.
Thank you so much for being here and elaborating more on what the AFL does. I think more now than ever, this is so important, and I just wanted to thank you for
the pleasure was truly mine. Thank you so much for the opportunity today. Thank you.